Okay, today will be quite a challenging project. We're going to draw a set of stairway, but seeing it from the front instead of seeing it from the side. And in order to do a full staircase, we need to have a second story. So we're going to be adding a loft with a railing of some kind. And so to get started, I'd like you to set up your paper like mine is. So I'll talk you through what we've got. We've got the horizon line with the central vanishing point. I made my central vanishing point slightly off to the side so that we can see more of the side view of the steps. And then what I'd like you to do is you're going to draw a 3x5 rectangle. I'd like 1 inch of it above your eye level and 2 inches of it below your eye level. And we need quite a bit of space, especially on the left side. And then draw a second 3x5 rectangle above that. So that will be our second story. All of the steps will be down here, but we need some place for people to go to once they get to the top of the steps. So that will be our second story. We're going to be adjusting these lines a little bit later to create more depth in the picture and make it feel like the loft is set back from the room that we're in. But for now, we're just going to have this sort of as a placeholder for that second level of depth that we're going to need. So go ahead and pause the video, get those lines drawn in. The other thing I'm going to need you to do is on this 3-inch section, the lower one, I want you to rule off 1/4 inch increments. So I'd like 12 divisions in that edge of the block there. So again, if you do a 3-inch rectangle, it's really easy to fit 12 in there. And once I get this expanded out, I'll show you how you can also slide your ruler along to find those even divisions anywhere along that foreshortened wall. Once you've gotten those diagrams put in there, what we're going to do is connect our central vanishing point through each of the 4 corners of the room to expand out the ceiling, the ground plane, and the walls. So align the central vanishing point through the bottom corner of your room and extend it outward. We're going to go from the central vanishing point through this uppermost line as well and bring that forward. And I'm going to draw that in lightly. We'll be actually following that line a little bit later to make the loft feel like it's deeper. And then from this upper corner through our central vanishing point, and then through this lower corner and our central vanishing point. I'll draw this in so that you can tell that's what I was using to figure that angle out. Okay. Actually, okay, leave that for now. So I'm going to pause the video for a minute while I'm drawing all these lines just to show you, save a little bit of time. But what I'll be doing is going from the central vanishing point through each one of these 12 divisions and extending those lines outward into the room. So I'll pause for just a second here while I do that. All right, so I very carefully extended each one of these lines out into the room. One area that I was getting concerned was I was afraid I was going to confuse my horizon line with one of my division lines. So I changed my horizon line into a dotted line so that it wouldn't confuse me when I got to doing these intricate measurements. You could also use a different color for your horizon line. If you have a colored pencil and you want to make that in red or some other color so that you're not getting it confused with the lines that we're going to be using to plot out our stairs, that's a good strategy. So we've got 12 steps. That's kind of a standard height staircase. And now what I'd like you to do is we're going to be plotting out the side view of the steps, but it's on this wall that's moving away from us now. So we know that the steps that are farther away from us, closer to that back wall, need to be small steps, and then as they come out closer, as the room seems to expand towards us, the steps need to be appearing to get larger too. So that's why we had to do this division method on the side wall, and then we'll use the diagonal to make sure that we're getting the same number of columns as we have rows, and also it'll take care of the problem of the foreshortened distance. So it will make the steps automatically appear to be getting smaller as they get closer to that back wall. So we're going to kind of estimate what we want the slope of that staircase to be. If you make it really steep, it would be a really dangerous staircase to walk up because there wouldn't be enough room to put your feet on the treads probably, and it would be super, super steep. So I'm going to try to bring mine out. I know that it'll get a little more distorted because we're getting farther and farther from our eye level, but I do want to try to extend the steps out far enough that we can draw them at a pretty good scale. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to choose the very top mark, so it'll be the point where our two 5x3x5 rectangles meet, and then I'm going to be drawing a diagonal down until it hits the bottom here. And again, you can decide what slope you want it to be, but I think what I want to do is make it not terribly steep. So maybe I'll just pick a point about here, and we're just going to connect that with a diagonal line. You don't need to make it an X, just a single diagonal works great for this exercise. Now, the other thing that I want to show you is when we're doing steps, you can either draw it from as if the steps are centered underneath the vanishing point. So you can see in this slide, we can't really see the side of the steps at all. We're only seeing the riser part, which is the vertical part, and then we're seeing the tread, which is the part you would be stepping on to go up. And as the steps get above our eye level, then also what happens is we no longer can even see the part that you would step on. All we can see is the vertical surface that is facing us. So this is one version you could try. If you do, yours will look a little bit different than mine. I'm going to show it more like this other version where we're seeing a little bit of the side plane. So we're going to make an open stairwell instead of one between two walls. We're going to maybe add a railing so that we can see that more foreshortened profile of the steps as well in our drawing. So this is kind of the view that I'm aiming for. And if you'll notice here, one new thing that we're going to be introducing in this drawing is the idea of a new vanishing point that has to do with objects that are on a slope. So this method works great if you're doing peaked roofs, if you're doing a couple of staircases that maybe you're running at different angles to one another, or if you've got a children's slide on if you're building like a playground equipment in perspective, you would use this method to draw the slide in the correct angle. So what happens is that central vanishing point that's on the horizon line works for any rectangular forms that are parallel to the ground plane. So as long as they're sitting flat on the ground, even if they're above your eye level, as long as it's still horizontally oriented, we're still going to use that central vanishing point that is on our eye level line. But the minute you take a plane and instead of having it, this way, as soon as you start sloping it so that it's angling up in space, suddenly it has to lead to a different vanishing point. And because we're sticking with one point perspective, what we're going to do is we're going to take our vanishing point, that's our central vanishing point, and we're going to extend a line straight up from that point, and we're going to add a new vanishing point that we're going to label, let's label it like the slope vanishing point. So we'll do the SVP for this one. And so I'm just going to pick a point. In fact, I'm going to find it by following this diagonal that we just created that set up the basic angle of our steps. And I'm just going to extend it until I'm straight above our central vanishing point. So maybe I'll find the straight line first to make sure what I'm aiming for. So I'm using a framer square to try to make sure that that's really a nice vertical line. And this is one of those exceptions where you may have some diagonals that don't lead to your central vanishing point, but it's still leading to a measuring line. So we'll be extending this slope of the steps up until it hits that dotted line that we just drew, that's straight above our vanishing point. So we're going to find a point here. And I'm going to draw this with a different color just so that we can keep it straight from our other. So this is a pink, like magenta color pencil. And that's going to be the slope that we're following when we're plotting out the steps. We're going to be adding another one later, like is showing in this slide right below my video. And but that we first need to decide how wide we want the steps to be. So for now, we're just going to be plotting out what the profile of the steps looks like. So what I'd like you to do, everywhere that let's label this one the slope vanishing point for now. Some people will say CVP1 or something to indicate that it's based on this other vanishing point, but it's been shifted in order to create an inclined plane. So from each point that this slope line crosses one of the divisions that we just drew, I'd like you to draw a little dot there. So go through as carefully as you can. The more accurately you do these measurements, the better your steps are going to look and the less distortion you'll have. So I'm drawing a little intersection point at each one of these points. And from each of those dots, I want you to draw a vertical line going straight up until it hits the next line, the next vanishing line. So I'll do a couple and then I'll pause the video so that you can pause it as well and get caught up on that step. So I'll do a couple of them just to show what I'm looking for here. So we're going to go straight up, and we've already got that vanishing line drawn, but I'm going to darken it now so that we can really see the profile of the steps starting to develop. So from this next point, again, just a true vertical line. Use your grid paper underneath your drawing paper if you need to, or use a T-square or your triangle to make sure that you keep those verticals really nice and straight. Otherwise, we're going to have some problems with distortion. So I'll maybe try this. Keeping that square along the top edge, and each line just goes up as far as the next line above it. It's not going to have to extend all the way up, just enough to reach that next step. So take a few minutes and carefully find me the silhouette of the steps, darken it in for me before we get to the next step so everybody is really clear about which lines to be following as we start to project the horizontal lines across to show the fronts of the steps. So you can see how I'm starting this. I've only got about 5 steps done. We've got quite a few more to do. So here's a good spot for me to pause for a second, and we'll all get caught up. Okay, we're back, and I've gotten all of my contours drawn in. You might notice that my drawing looks a little bit different than the example that's right below me. And in that example, they use this slope vanishing line to line up with the outer tips of each of the steps. On mine, I'm lining up with the inner corners of each step. So as long as you do it consistently, it shouldn't make a difference. If you feel like you want to have a double guideline, one for the outer corner and one for the inner corner, that can make you even more precise. But what happens when you use the outer corner of the steps is you might notice that they lost a couple of steps. So we only, even though they made, I think it's 1, 2, 3, they made 4 different divisions, they only ended up with 3 steps because they kind of lose the very front one and they lose the top one. So my method has the same basic principle, but it's going to look a little bit different than the example that's right below me. So do double check that you did not accidentally draw one of your steps as your eye level line. It's possible that your division hit right on your eye level line, and that would be okay, but do make sure that you just have 12 steps and not 13 with a weird little one here in the middle somewhere. Correct that error if you made it before we get any farther. So the next thing we need to decide is how far we want the steps to extend into the room. I really do want to see some of the side plane of it, so I'm not going to make them super wide. I'm going to try to stop them over here somewhere. So I'm going to start by drawing the very bottom step, and here again it's really important that you truly are using a horizontal line. So if you have some device to help you make sure that you're drawing them nice and straight, please use that. And remember, the grid paper underneath is an option if you don't have a T-square or a, so you can do this kind of thing so that you can see through the paper if you don't have another way to ensure that the lines are nice and straight. So I'm going to start by figuring out the bottom step first and go ahead and draw, and making sure it's as square as possible with your edge. Come across as far as you want that bottom step to go. So I'm just going to bring mine about to here. And we don't know where to stop that vertical yet. So what we're going to do is, for each one of these steps, at each point that it changes direction, I would like you to bring a line straight across. Now, when we get up to these steps that are above our eye level, you may not even be able to see that second, inner point where my pink line is going through there. So don't worry as much about the ones that are going to be out of our viewpoint, but do make sure you're connecting the outer peaks of each step with a true horizontal line. So we're just going to be extending those across for now, and then once we decide In fact, let's go ahead and add in that second line. Since this pink line starts at the bottom of the bottom step, once we know how wide we want that bottom step to be, we can also add that second pink line leading. It's going clear up to this special vanishing point, our slope vanishing point. It does not go to the central vanishing point anymore because we're just, for now, just trying to figure out that basic angle that all of our steps will be following. All right. So the inner corners of each of these steps should also align along this pink line. So I'm going to go ahead. This next step will take quite a few minutes too, so I'll do a few steps and then I'll have the video paused while we draw in all of the other ones, but I'll show you the first few so that you're sure that you know what you're doing. All right, so I'm bringing in, at every point that this changes, we'll be adding a line in there. You'll notice the divisions get closer and closer together as we get closer and closer to our eye level. As we approach that horizon line, you'll see less and less of the surface of the step that you would actually put your foot on, the tread. So you can see how we're starting. I'm going to go ahead and finish off all of these other steps. And once I get above eye level, I'm only going to worry about this outer corner of the step. I won't even really necessarily have to find the inner one, but we'll pause there for a second. Okay, I zoomed in a little bit more so you can see the details a little bit better. But what I've done is I've used my L tool to make sure that all of these lines are truly horizontal. And I've drawn double lines, so I've got lines that lead to the outer points of each step as well as the inner points of each step. Even when I got above the eye level, I went ahead and put in dotted lines for the part of the the inner angle of each step, just so that I can find it on this other side where my pink vanishing line is heading to this special vanishing point. So what I'd like you to do, because this gets pretty complicated, we've got a lot of lines really close together, so what I'd like you to do is track back to what's happening on this side and put a dot on the same line as you had dots here. So it'll be the inner corner of each step, just so that we can make sure that we're using the right point. So you're kind of skipping every other line, but do check occasionally to make sure you're drawing the dots on the same line, and not miss one somehow. Here, now that we've gotten above eye level, they're at almost the same point, and then the dot starts to get below the line as we get higher and higher on the staircase. So we're to the point where we're starting to finish off this edge of the steps now. And look back to what happened on the left side so that you can make sure you're doing things in the right order. But we're going to be alternating between a truly vertical line and then a line that leads to this central vanishing point, our original vanishing point. We're not going to be using this one much at all anymore. So straight up on that bottommost line, so from each one of these dots that we just drew, we're going to be taking a line straight up like we did on the left side of the steps. The more accurate you are, the better this ends up working out. So take your time, and you can go step by step, alternating vertical lines and then a vanishing line, or if you just want to draw all of the verticals first, whatever works for you is fine. So while we're below the vanishing or the horizon line, we'll be able to see both the riser and the tread of the steps. But what happens here is we're going to start losing that. So you're going to actually be sloping your vanishing lines downward once we get above eye level. So I'll show you how that works, and we'll kind of clean up things as we go. So here, let's the ruler. I'll just show how to complete these bottom few steps. We're going to erase any bits of line that extend to the right of that vertical that we just drew, and we're going to be finishing off the tread of the step, the part that you would step on. So if you constructed it correctly, those vertical lines that you just drew should line up pretty closely with our vanishing lines. The angle should match pretty well. If you find that they just are not matching up at all, it could be that either your horizontal lines that you drew in or these vertical lines weren't quite true, and so that's going to cause some misalignment of your angles, but it's not a big deal. So you can see we can start to imagine these bottom few steps already, and then we'll continue to alternate between truly vertical lines for the riser and then a vanishing line for the tread. I like to do several of the verticals at once since I've already got the triangle lined up with the dots there. Okay, so to finish off this top part, we're going to have to do some cleaning up here so you can kind of see what the new angles are going to look like. And we're extending from those dots that we drew to these solid lines that we've brought across. So on the very top step, we would actually be looking up at the underside of that step, so it's actually going to extend up above the line where the loft is going to start. And then here we're connecting the front of the second step downward to this inner corner between the first and the second step from the top. So that also is going to be a kind of a weird downward angle, which is unusual, but it's exactly how you would see things if you were looking at a real set of steps. So try to get rid of any lines that are confusing things. You might still have some residual lines from when you drew your horizontals that are making things look wrong. So erase any horizontals that extend beyond those verticals that we just drew. And it looks like I missed this step as well. So that should actually be that's a vanishing line. It's nearly horizontal, but it really is still sloping upward toward this central vanishing point. Now you can decide if you want your stairs to be built into a wall that, where we have a solid space here, or you could make them more like they're built out of slabs of concrete where it's more of a floating staircase. It's really up to you how you want to finish this, but I'll show you how to board it in if you want it to look more solid. So what we'll do is from this point where the steps attach to the loft area, we'll just draw a vertical straight down until we hit the ground plane where the back wall meets the ground. And then from this point, we connect back to our central vanishing point and just extend it out until we hit this bottom step. And that will make it feel like there's a wall there that step is attached to. And again, erase any lines that are confusing things. I already did go ahead and lighten a lot of these construction lines so that we can start to see the steps more clearly. So go in with a fine tip eraser and lighten some of those lines, or you could darken in the correct lines with a marker or a fine tip pen so that it really pops out nice and clearly. You could also add hatching to make the plane changes more noticeable. So if you wanted to add a little bit of hatching on the vertical planes of the steps so that it was more clear how they were oriented spatially, you can do that. Now, I've added a person. I did this during one of my little pauses, and I want you to think about how big a person would be if they were up in this loft area. So if a person were standing near a railing right at the front of the loft, they would be maybe just a tiny bit smaller than this guy, because it'd be maybe a foot or two further back in space behind them. So I'm going to just take this distance, and I'm going to move him up as if there's someone standing here. You could even slide him along if you want him to be at the top of the steps. You could put him over here. So you're just shrinking him down a tiny bit, but essentially he's almost the same distance from us as the guy that's on the ground plane here. So you could draw someone up here as if they're about to come down the steps, talk to us. And let's make this a little bit safer. So we're going to add a railing, and usually, you know, a railing might be slightly above your waist level. So since we know how tall a man would be or a person would be if they were up at that loft, we could just estimate where a safe height might be for a railing. And because this plane is not foreshortened, we can just draw that railing using true horizontal lines and vertical lines. So you could take your ruler and plot off a post every, you know, centimeter or half centimeter, and go ahead and draw that in if you want to. I'm going to make my railing, we'll just pretend it's glass so that we don't have to draw a million rails, but you could certainly just measure across and put in as many rails as you want. We'll just make ours, again, glass for now. And we could also use a rail going down the steps so that our children don't fall off the sides here. So because we know how tall the rail needs to be up near the top here, we could just go from this point where the railing attaches and use our second vanishing point, our special slope vanishing point, to direct it down the steps at the right height all the way along there. So I'm just going to align my second vanishing point, my special vanishing point, with this point where the railing height needs to be starting from, and we can draw that in. It's really easy. You could even estimate the thickness of that railing based on how thick it is there at the top of the steps. So it should get a little bit thicker as it comes down towards us. But that would be a quick, easy way, and this part wouldn't actually be visible, but we could make it connect here where the railing, and then you think about the vertical supports that might be attached on the steps. And you might just choose, like, every third step, I'm going to add a post to help support that. So, and you can construct it as realistically as you want. Maybe here, think about this as being a long cylinder with a central line that is leading toward that vanishing point. So your ellipse would be oriented along the line of the sloping vanishing point, and you could erase the bits of the step that are inside that railing so it looks more solid. You could add a little shading if you want to, and maybe every second step you would just add another post there. So as the steps get smaller, try to make the posts get a little bit smaller. You might even notice how wide the railing itself is at that particular spot. So skip a step, maybe you do another one here. Try to keep those, I'm freehanding them just to save some time, but you'd want to use your T-square if you can. So you're just adding, you know, supports to keep that handrail nice and stable. And then let's think about this. So right now, this part of the loft feels like it's just a flat wall, like he's walked up to a wall, but you can't get into that loft. So what we need to do is extend that room by erasing this original wall and moving it backward into space. So you could estimate down here how deep you want that wall to be and extend it up until we can see it. Or you could just kind of arbitrarily say, I'm just going to make it, maybe it's only an 8-foot deep loft, big enough for a twin bed or something, and you can just sort of guesstimate where you want that to be. But what it involves is shifting the ceiling line further in toward the vanishing point to create a deeper space, and then we're also moving these walls in. So we're moving these two lines closer to the vanishing point, and we're moving this line a little closer, and they should all meet right at these corners of our original room. So I'll be shifting this in. Let's just move it down, let's say an inch. I'll use my ruler. So I'm just lining it up with that one, and I'm just moving it down until I hit this corner. And that tells me where I need to bring the verticals in. So if I could see through the room that we're in, you know, that second wall would end up coming back in here somewhere. So erasing this will help make that make more sense. And then perhaps the railing just sort of attaches on an ellipse there as it anchors to the wall. This line disappears. And this line actually, unfortunately, ends up being right behind this guy that I drew. So I have to kind of draw it transparently so I can still locate it. But if we could see that back corner of the room, it would be right here. Maybe I'll move that guy so we can see it after all. We'll put him back into the loft area. So I'm going to make him a little smaller as if he's standing a little bit further away, just kind of shrink him down. But remember, his feet would be here somewhere if we could see through the floor. You know, like he's back in that room a little bit further. So if we could see through the floors, this would be the floor of the loft area. So you want to make sure that it felt like he could really be standing on that area. And then remember, this is not the actual room. The room goes back behind the steps too. So I'm going to go back to that original rectangle to kind of estimate where the back of that room might be. But we can draw that in as a solid line now that that figure has been moved. Alright, so hopefully you can kind of get a sense of that extra deep space there now. And if you use line weight variation to really kind of emphasize, I've drawn mine really dark so you can see it in the video, but in your drawing, maybe the parts that are closer you can make a little bit stronger, bolder lines. And then if you use your kneaded eraser to lighten these a little bit so they do feel like they're receding back into space, then the drawing's depth will be even a little bit more clear to the viewer. That's a good spot to stop on that drawing. If you have any questions, I'll post some extra diagrams on the homework assignment that shows some other people's drawings of steps a little bit closer up so that you can study them and try to figure out where you might have made a mistake.